Hi everybody. The next few minutes I'd like to have a little chat about why companies from overseas typically come to the Netherlands. So they could basically go everywhere in the European Union, but very often they will choose for the Netherlands, and there are a few reasons for that. One reason is that the Netherlands is by marketeers generally recognized as sort of a perfect test market for products. It's a sophisticated market, yet it's not too big. So before launching your product in the larger markets like France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands is very good for tryouts. But there's a far more important reason, and that's actually a historic reason. Basically, ever since the build-up after the Second World War, the Netherlands became the gateway into Europe. And taxation was the preeminent reason for that, but there were a couple of other reasons, and that is why you would see that since the 1950s, basically, first US companies, then Canadian companies, and then later on also the Japanese and the Korean companies, they basically followed in the footsteps of the American companies. So why did they choose the Netherlands? Well, the Netherlands is a rich country. At that point in time, certainly it was one of the richest countries, if not the richest country in Europe. There was a big discovery of a gas field in the Netherlands. It's the biggest gas field in Europe in 1963, which obviously helped with state finances in the Netherlands. It has always been a politically very stable and free-thinking liberal country. It's well organized, well run, like most Northern European countries. People who are not too familiar with Europe may consider all of Europe basically one and the same. It certainly isn't. Southern European countries are much less well organized and less well run, have a lot more red tape, etc. And Eastern European countries, ambitious, but they've for a very long time been under communist rule, and only since the 1990s are democracies, and therefore they don't have the same tradition and stable regimes as the Northern European countries. Then another important reason is clearly it's part of the common market. It's actually one of the founding members. You could even say that the Benelux was sort of a tryout for the EEG, which later became the EU. And that common market has given us tremendous benefits. If, for instance, you consider that the UK was sitting at the table when the Treaty of Rome was negotiated, and then at the very last moment decided not to participate, they very much regretted it, and already a few years later they then tried to apply it, but then Georges de Gaulle blocked admission of the UK on a multiple of occasions. You clearly saw that continental Europe then was doing far better, economically speaking, than the UK. So that worked out very well. It's a different story for the euro. I consider that the biggest geopolitical mistake since the Second World War. And there I'm fully on the side of the British. They were absolutely right not to participate. There are a couple of practical things. The Netherlands is very important in European infrastructure, logistics. We have two of the most important ports of Europe. Rotterdam is actually the biggest port of Europe. We have Schiphol, which is a very efficient, well-liked airport by many foreigners. And we have the fastest internet in Europe. All of those things obviously help. Then it's also rooted in much longer tradition and culture and history. We've always been a nation of traders, so that's in our DNA. We've been sailing the seven seas. The Dutch East India Company was the first multinational of the world. In those days, the Netherlands was also very important in the international financial markets because we had, the rule of law, and we had a very well-developed financial system. During the Dutch Golden Age, the Dutch florin was actually the reserve currency of the world. That was the period from 1640 till 1720, about when it was replaced by the French franc. In that period, for instance, the Independence War was financed through Amsterdam, through bonds issued and traded in Amsterdam. And that tradition stayed until today. The euro bond market for a very large takes place through Dutch companies because of our financial system, but also because of our tax system. We do not levy withholding tax on interest, which obviously in the bond market is a big benefit. And that brings me to the most important part, and that's our tax system in general. where I would say that's the benefits based on 3 pillars. The first one is the participation exemption, which basically provides 100% exemption for dividends and capital gains. It has largely been copied now by the rest of Europe. This has occurred since 1992, when there was an EU directive, the Parent Subsidiary Directive was introduced, and then slowly on other countries started to realize that the Dutch exemption system was actually a much more efficient system than the credit system that had been applied up to that moment by almost all other European countries. We can say that we have the best tax treaty system in the world, not only in its size and its scope, but also in the quality of the treaties. The UK treaty network would come very close. It's probably even bigger, but I would say in Asia and in Latin America, the Netherlands treaty network would be slightly better. It depends on which country you're really interested in. The UK certainly has an extremely good treaty network as well. And the third one, and that was for a very long time really unique in the world, and that's the Dutch tax ruling system. We have a very open and transparent dialogue with the tax authorities. Their thinking and our thinking is it's much better to have all the issues up on front on the table. Then you can discuss it, decide what the right analysis is, and then typically we come to an agreement, and thereafter there's no more debate. They put it in writing, they put their signature under it, and that's it. That system has been criticized, unfortunately, and it has changed somewhat. So now quite often we sort of have not really official rulings, but what I call quasi rulings. But the essence of it is basically still the same. You might then wonder, well, which other countries would be suitable? Well, the UK is certainly for English-speaking people, an obvious consideration. Now, since Brexit, however, it's not that suitable anymore, simply because it's outside of the EU, which basically disqualifies itself, no longer qualifies for EU directive benefits and the like. Ireland is another candidate, low tax rate, but it has never been very popular as a holding company location. The newer economies like Poland, interesting, but again, it has no tradition to host holding companies or finance companies. Hungary is the only one in Eastern Europe that you might consider, although the political climate is of course very different from our political climate. So then what is the downside of the Netherlands? Well, in the past people would have said the climate. And if I think back as a young boy, biking to school through the rain, but all of that has changed. Global warming, we have fantastic weather now in the Netherlands, so we can grow wine here.